From the job site to the code book, this is a Pool Envy podcast, where licensed pool professionals speak up. Code, compliance, craftsmanship. Hosted by Jason Davies, licensed across Wisconsin, Florida, and Texas. Your deep end starts now.
This week, I saw a water test printout that scored 100%. And it was still chemically aggressive. Not slightly off. Not close enough. Actually in a range where, over time, it can start pulling material out of the plaster and grout. So the question is, how can something test perfect and still be wrong? Here's what was posted. Pool store printout, everything in range. Picture this. pH 7.4. Total alkalinity 85. Calcium right where you'd expect. CYA around 60. And the bottom, congratulations, you scored 100%. That's the moment where most people stop thinking. They assume, I'm good, water balanced, done and over with. And what makes this tricky is nothing about that printout looks concerning. There's no warning, no red flag. It's presented as finished, as if there's nothing left to question. But when you actually run numbers correctly, that same water comes out to about a negative 0.3 to negative 0.4 LSI. That's not balanced. That's aggressive, corrosive water. Here's what's happening, and this is the part almost nobody explains. Quick version. Cyanuric acid ties up part of your total alkalinity. So that number you see on the test isn't fully available to buffer the water. When you adjust for that, the water can become more aggressive than it looks. And most printouts don't account for that properly, which is why you can see a perfect score and still have aggressive water. And just to add another layer to this, I run into a lot of those store tests that vary quite a bit from one test to the next. Not because anyone's doing anything wrong, but because small shifts in one value, like alkalinity or CYA, can skew how everything else is interpreted. So when you're looking for a perfect printout, you're really looking at just a snapshot, not necessarily the full behavior of the water. And this is really the bigger point. One test doesn't always tell you the full story, not because testing is bad, but because it's a single snapshot of something that's constantly changing. And when that snapshot gets turned into a simple score, it can give a level of confidence that is not justified. So instead of asking, did this test pass? It's better to step back and ask, does this actually make sense for how the water should behave? Because when you start looking at patterns instead of singular results, that's when you begin to really see what's going on in the pool. This is where it becomes real. At an LSI around negative 0.3 to negative 0.4, you're not seeing failure overnight. But this is how a pool can look perfectly maintained and still end up with premature surface wear, grout loss, or even metal issues over time. And the key point is this. The water doesn't look bad when it's doing damage. It's slow, it's quiet, and by the time it shows up, it doesn't get traced back to bad water chemistry. It gets blamed on materials or installation, or just age. When in reality, the conditions were there the entire time. And this is really where a data-driven approach starts to matter. Because over time, what protects the pool isn't a single test. It's the pattern those tests create. When you have consistent data over time, you're no longer guessing at what the water is doing. You can actually see it. And that becomes your documentation. So if something does start to go wrong, it's no longer, that's just the way it is. You can go back and say, no, here's what the water was doing, here's where it shifted. And that changes the conversation completely. And this also applies even if you have a pool service. This isn't about you versus them. It's about having a record of what the water was doing over time. Because if something ever comes into question, you're not relying on opinions. You're looking at data. And at that point, it's not one side against the other. It's data versus data. So instead of asking, is everything in range? The better question is, what is the water doing to the surface over time? Because you can be in range and within guidelines, and still trending in the wrong direction. The fix is usually not complicated, but it does require looking at the water correctly first. This is the same pattern I talk about all the time. Things that look right, but are wrong underneath. And in this industry, That missing piece is usually where the problems start. This episode is for general information only and not a substitute for site-specific evaluation. Always verify conditions before making changes.
Thanks for listening to the Pool Envy Podcast, where licensed pool professionals speak up. Hosted by Jason Davies, licensed across Wisconsin, Florida, and Texas. For more insights, subscribe and join us next time.